A story that just keeps getting more and more involved, yet is basically 17 years old, is a story that involves the Church of Scientology. It involves Lisa McPherson, the death of Lisa McPherson. It involves federal judges and so many more. And it just had some new news roll up today. I'm going to go to Tony Ortega, who's been on WCCO before. He is the editor-in-chief of the Village Voice, but more importantly, he's been writing about and learning about the Church of Scientology since the 80s, and he joins me this morning here on WCCO. Good morning, Tony. How you doing?
Hey, John. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk with you. You must be familiar with all of this case here that I started to detail just trying to do a thumbnail sketch.
It's incredibly complex. It's dauntingly complex, but let me try and break it down into its important parts. You mentioned Lisa McPherson. She was a longtime church member, troubled person. She had a mental breakdown on a public road in Clearwater, Florida, after a little fender bender accident. And after the paramedics checked on her, she suddenly just took off all her clothes in the middle of the road. So they took her to a local hospital. They wanted to get her a psychiatric check. Well, you know, in the Church of Scientology, psychiatry is the devil. And they said, no, she doesn't want a psychiatry check. We'll take care of her. So the church took her to the Fort Harrison Hotel, which is the centerpiece of Scientology's spiritual mecca in Clearwater, Florida. 17 days later, Lisa McPherson was dead. And she was in horrendous shape. When that was found out, a state criminal investigation of Scientology was launched. It took several years. What finally derailed it was a county medical examiner just changing the cause of death from undetermined to accidental. When that happened, the criminal investigation ended. But there was still civil litigation for years. Lisa McPherson's aunt, Del Liebrick, brought a lawsuit, wrongful death lawsuit, and she was represented by an attorney named Ken Dandar. That lawsuit was finally settled in 2004, and most of us thought this was all over with. I mean, it was one of the worst periods of bad publicity for Scientology in its history, but the criminal investigation was over and the civil case was over. So why is it all coming back now?
Yes.
Well, it's so complex. Ken Dandar signed the agreement in 2004 to end the case. And the dispute is the church says in signing the settlement, Ken Dandar agreed never again to sue the church. Ken Dandar says that's not true. He was just signing as his client's attorney. He made no such promise. But a few years later, Ken did sue the church again, this time over another death involving a young man who killed himself. And the church then cried foul and said, wait a minute, you promised never to sue us again. And even though while Dandar was suing Scientology in a federal court, a state court was saying, yeah, you can't sue them again. And it just got into a crazy situation where he was being fined. The federal judge says you can't drop the case. Anyway, the point is, years later, Scientology is still suing Dandar. And next week, Ken says he expects a state judge to award Scientology $1 million in fees.
$1 million in fees that will come from Dandar.
Because he sued Scientology again, as he represented a client. So Ken, on October 31st, filed a federal lawsuit saying to the federal judge, listen, I can't, this is a violation of my civil rights. An attorney can't sign away his right to represent clients like that, and that Scientology has manipulated the courts. That lawsuit was filed but didn't get much attention until last week when, to bolster his case, Ken filed a deposition from Marty Rathbun. Now, Marty was once the second highest official in Scientology. So when all that McPherson stuff was going on back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was Marty Rathbun who was running the legal affairs of the church. And so now he's out, and now he's a big critic of the church. So under oath, he testified that, yes, we improperly tried to influence judges during that time and spent millions of dollars doing so. Marty estimated that Scientology spent between $28 to $30 million in order to derail the criminal case and tamper down the civil case. So one of the allegations he makes is that when remember I mentioned that medical examiner changed the cause of death?
Yes.
And that's what ended the criminal case? Marty Rathbun is now saying they accomplished that by influencing her through her own attorney. That Scientology plied her attorney with gifts like Super Bowl tickets and expensive cufflinks to reward him for influencing his own client to change the cause of death. So in other words, Scientology's former second highest official is now coming forward and saying, yes, we spent millions of dollars to corrupt Florida's courts. Now, that didn't help Dandar, though, because yesterday the federal judge decided that she cannot intervene with that state court hearing, and so it's going forward. So on Monday, Ken Dandar is facing that $1 million fee award judgment against him.
And wow! So he's just basically being handcuffed then in this particular case, and
that's his contention, right?
Wow. So where will this go from here? And first of all, talking with Tony Ortega, who was not only editor-in-chief at Village Voice, but has spent, a couple of plus decades here learning what you can and learning what you've been able to, because it's not easy to get information about the inside workings of the Church of Scientology, is it?
It's hard work, but let me point out, I did leave The Voice recently. I'm writing a book about Scientology now, but I'm still continuing to report on the church. In fact, I'm in Los Angeles right now talking to various former officials in the church to gather more information. It's actually getting a little easier to find out this information because more and more people are leaving the Church of Scientology and coming forward. But this, and Marty Rathbun's been out for several years, but this is new information. It's stunning. So far, it hasn't helped Ken Dandar in his case, but he says he's going to file an amended complaint, continue to fight as long as he has to. Those of us who watched the Lisa McPherson matter back in the day, I have to say we often wondered at what some of these judges were doing and some of the decisions that were made. It just seemed like some of these things didn't make much sense. So when Marty Rathbun comes forward now and says, yeah, that's because the Church of Scientology gamed the system, that's a pretty big allegation. The church tried to get his deposition struck from the record yesterday, but the judge refused. So even though she has not granted Dandar the injunction he was seeking, she did keep Marty Rathbun's testimony on the record, so it's still a public document.
This is just like so convoluted, so involved in all of this here. That take there about the medical examiner was Joan Wood, and it was her attorney who was supposedly influencing her to change the cause of death to accidental.
And the criminal investigation.
And the criminal investigation.
Marty's contention, and I want to point out that Jeffrey Goodis, Joan Wood's attorney, has denied that allegation.
Oh, that he ever received anything?
Well, he has acknowledged that he received gifts, but he says that it was after she made that decision.
Well, for what other possibility reason would there be? It's like, we're just giving you this just for the heck of it here. And wasn't it one of these things, too? Now, tell me if I'm reading this right. In some of these cases for influence, it's like, not only will we give you this much money, these really expensive cufflinks, because apparently the guy had some sort of a fetish for collecting cufflinks, correct?
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, well, but also, we'll get you FaceTime with John Travolta, who is still one of those who remains quite, at the higher up in the higher levels here in the Church of Scientology. And that's supposed to have some value.
That's another part of the case which I had written about previously, which is that around that time, when the McPherson matter was going on, Scientology went shopping for a local political operative that they could make use of. And Marty Rathbun and another former Scientology official, Mike Linder, say that they hired this political operative named Mary Repper to be their local person there. And she then would host parties in her house that the celebrities would go to, Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and then they would invite local influential leaders to meet these people. I've already written about that. That story's been out for a while. But Marty brought that up again in his deposition, that was part of their strategy to get people, to sway people, to convince them that Scientology was being unfairly treated in this criminal and civil investigation. Now,
and you say currently you're working on a book. This is what your primary focus is, and you're finding more and more former members who are willing to chat. Why is there an increase in former members? Are people just going, you know what, this isn't for me after all? Is there some sort of a wave where people are falling away and dropping away like in greater numbers than previously?
Well, the larger story is that Scientology is in the grips of a major crisis and is literally splitting apart. There's been a lot more coverage this year because of the divorce of Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, but that's really not what threatens the church's existence. It's this, people like Marty Rathbun who left the church and are now creating what they call an independent Scientology movement. And a lot of longtime church members who are used to spending a lot of money are coming out and objecting to the leadership of the current, Scientology leader, David Miscavige. It's a real problem for the church. It's been fascinating watching it happen. There are a lot of people coming out of the church who are saying they still are into L. Ron Hubbard, the guy that came up with all these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They still like his philosophies. They just don't like what's happened to the current church. And it's mainly that, the emphasis for these Scientologists used to be on their own personal spiritual journey, and they paid a lot of money, but they went up what's called the Bridge to Total Freedom, and, they created new auditors to do counseling. But in the last 10 years, Miscavige has put the emphasis on purely just donations for new buildings, donations for new initiatives, and Scientologists are under incredible pressure to give thousands and thousands of dollars at every event they go to. And so they're not getting their own personal cases, or they're not getting anywhere. And this is what I hear from person after person who leaves the church. They just get exhausted from the constant fundraising that they're subjected to.
Boy, this is going to be a curious thing. You mentioned Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, highly publicized, and about her having to escape from the church, escape from the connection with Tom Cruise. How much of what we were reading or hearing in some of the gossip situations, Tony? How much of that was true, and how much of it was just an exaggeration in the part of the media?
Well, the tabloids have been hyping a lot of the behavior of Tom since things happened. But I don't think there's much question that if you look at the way Katie Holmes made the break happen, this was something she had to have planned for months. And we know that her father in particular was unhappy with Scientology. In fact, Vanity Fair reported that Katie's father was telling people he wanted her to get away from it before she even married Tom. So when Katie Holmes then leaves the way she did, filing in New York while he's out of town, having already secured another apartment, and it was just with surgical precision that she made it happen. I really don't doubt that Scientology was a big part of why she decided to get out and get Surrey away from what would then become the beginning of her education in Scientology. She's getting to the age now that she would begin getting more of an indoctrination into the church, and I don't think Katie wanted that to happen.
We got to talk again when you get your book together.
You bet.
For sure. I mean, you work on that, and we'll talk between now and then as this story continues forward. I'm loving this stuff, Tony, and I appreciate having somebody who's got a good understanding of it to share it with me.
Well, you ask great questions. It's a lot of fun.
Well, hey, thanks. We'll talk again.
All right, thanks.
Take care. Tony Ortega, formerly the editor-in-chief of Village Voice, now working on this project. A couple of thoughts on this coming up, and I'll get to your comments when we continue next year on WCCO. Got behind a little bit there. That's fascinating stuff, finding out about that. I know nothing about Scientology or the Church of. I do remember being at the bus stop at Franklin and Nicollet and seeing the front. That was their Scientology, I think that was their reading room or whatever. And there was lots of copies of L. Ron Hubbard's books, Dianetics. Was that the name of the book? I think that was the name.
One of the many, yeah.
One of the many, yeah. But this would have been back in when I was, it was 30 many years, a lot of times.
You still have one on Nicollet Mall over by Channel 4.
Is there?
Right
Adam,
on Nicollet Mall.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. I'm so glad that WCCO is taking time to talk about this because it is a very important issue. And people really don't understand just how dangerous this organization that's unfortunately labeled as a religion really is to people. You talked about Katie Holmes trying to escape and successfully escaping. It's very, very difficult for people to get away just because of the way that this organization controls people financially, physically, emotionally, the whole gambit.
Are you connected to it, or were you connected at one time?
Never, but I originally heard about it from the Lisa McPherson story. An interesting thing, they've been talking about this, ever since the death. It quieted down in the mainstream media, but it's always been a buzz on the internet. People have always been screaming for justice for Lisa. No matter how few people listened to them, they were still screaming. They were so passionate about it because Scientology had done so many of these people wrong that they felt that everybody needs to know. And now that this is coming back out, I'm just so glad to hear organizations here, giving people a voice that have been in the church, have had these bad experiences, and are letting people know.
Yeah, this is quite the story. Especially it involves the McPherson family lawyer, this Kenan Dandar. And where this all comes from, and now he's been slapped with this $1 million sanction for representing somebody else in a case against them.
Yeah, I heard a little bit about that too. So, something else interesting, Ms. Cabbage, the leader of the organization, most, if not all, of his family members are now excommunicated and labeled suppressive people. And nobody's seen David's wife in several months right now. It's another big mystery of the church. This lady who was, her name escapes me, but she had a very public role in Scientology, and she's just completely disappeared.
Do you think it's all about the money now? It's all about the finances to keep this thing going?
I think it's all about just control. I mean, one of the stated goals of Scientology is control of this planet. And they believe they have a mandate. They believe that they are the only group that can save this world, that no other view or political or ideological view works with this world, that Scientology needs to be the instructive force driving this world, and that they're the ones that need to deliver it to us.
Yeah. Well, this case going forward is going to be something to watch, involving Rathman and Mark Rathman and Kenan Dandar and all of these players. And by the way, to go back to this, we didn't cover this when I was talking with Tony Ortega. Looking at Lisa McPherson, they said that she had a severe mental breakdown and died from a pulmonary embolism after church officials reportedly delayed taking her to a hospital because they feared doctors would put her in a psych ward. And that doesn't, augur or reflect well on the Church of Scientology at that particular point, because as Tony Ortega had said, they are the ultimate evil. Hey, keep in touch, will you? Ring in anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for calling, Adam. Appreciate it. It is, 11:34, News Radio 830 WCCO. We'll get traffic, we'll get weather, and then we'll get back on track here. Poor kids. That story coming up next on WCCO.